Good morning. How are we doing today? My name is James Sweeney, aka SplitSuit. Welcome to vlog episode number 9. Without further ado, let's jump right into this session playing 1-2 over at Orange City in Florida. Let's get started. This first hand looking down at Queen 9 offsuit in the hijack. There's a $5 straddle on the button. Big blind completes, and they're the kind of person who looks like they're going to do this with a large chunk of hands. Decide to attack 220, just looking to isolate the big blind limper, or at least make sure this doesn't go 4-way to it. End up getting called by the cutoff. Everyone else folds, so end up going heads up to it out of position. Flop comes Jack 7-6 rainbow. I check, they check behind, and before moving on to the turn, this is a really good situation to check the flop and then definitely heavily consider going for a delay c-bet instead of just a straight up c-bet on the flop. And this is largely for two reasons. First is that the flop texture just completely sucks. It's one that is definitely going to favor the calling player's range a tremendous amount of the time, plus they have position. That's not great for us. And the number two is that the cutoff is a middle-aged player who I'm assuming is going to be pretty straightforward, and given that, I'm assuming that a delay c-bet when they decide to check behind, that check behind range on the flop is going to be very face up, very straightforward, and as such I can pretty much fire a tremendous amount of turns knowing that they're going to fold a very good chunk of the time. So that's kind of what's going into the delay c-bet thought in this exact spot. So with all of that said, the turn card is the 8 of clubs, rainbow, but decide to fire for 20, keep the plan up, and obviously totally nice card given the fact that it gives us that straight draw, but this is one where, again, like he's probably going to fold a decent amount of time, especially with like those smaller pocket pairs or the overcards that are just not super interested in. And also, if they do decide to call, they're probably going to be super capped, and as such, they're probably going to hate a big bet on the river a large chunk of the time. I don't get the chance to go for that double barrel, but again, this is all kind of factoring into the overall thought process with the flop check and also the turn bet. Not just because we picked up a straight draw, but also thinking about everything wrapped into one piece. That's this hand. Let's get on to hand number 2. Alright, this next one we are at the same table, just moved over one seat when the person to my right left. Sitting under the gun, look down at ace king of hearts, raise 2-6, and at some tables this bet size gets the job done, at others not so much. At this stage in the game I thought the 6 was doing okay. Unfortunately, it doesn't really seem like it accomplished the goal that I wanted. Ended up picking up 1, 2, 3, 4 callers. Always something to pay attention to is which raise sizes are getting the job done and creating good situations for you, and which ones not so much, and then adjusting as you see fit. So small blind checks in the dark on the flop, checks to me, and I check on a board of 10-9-6 with 2 hearts. So obviously flopping the nut flush draw is always great, but this is a texture that is really not particularly good for us in the slightest. So I decide instead of firing here, I'm just going to pretty much check my entire range and we'll make decisions. Can always go for a check raise if the situation unfolds so nicely, or just go for a check call. Obviously never going to be check folding here. If the flop gets checked through, we'll just make turn decisions, but I think a lot of players end up making mistakes because on boards that are super wet and right through the middle like this, they tend to c-bet with extremely predictable ranges, and sometimes you can just kind of throw a bunch of extra stuff into your check range, especially in these really multi-way pots, and I think this is a much better situation to do exactly that. So as it ends up rolling out, end up getting checks from everybody eventually. Turn is the king of clubs, checks to me. I fire for 15. I think this should have been 20. I think 15 is just a tad small. End up getting called by the small blind. River is the 9 of hearts. They check. And I decide to fire this for 80. So the main variables to note in this situation is that the small blind is someone who is young, they're loose, and they seem to be pretty darn inelastic. I've played a couple different sessions with them, so I have a pinch of history. We haven't tangled too much, but I pay a lot of attention to what they are doing. And what you mostly need to know in this situation is they can have trips, that's important to note, and they almost certainly never have a boat. So I don't think that they ever really have 10-9 or king-9 and decide to play it this way. And yes, they can have all those hands from preflop. This is just the kind of situation where I think I'm looking at a spot where they are very capped off at second best hands, and second best hands that I think they're going to be fairly inelastic with. And this is the kind of person who does even call the turn with a tremendous amount of like gut shot kind of hands. So again, kind of goes into why I could have bet that turn a little bit larger just overall. This is a really nice situation to overbet. It looks kind of bluffy ourselves. If they have any sort of pair that now turn into two pair, I think they're going to continue a very, very good chunk of the time. If they have trips, they're obviously not going anywhere either. If they happen to have a smaller flush, obviously fireworks will probably end up happening. And again, I probably don't have to worry about being behind all that often. I don't think this person is going to check call turn with sets or two pair or any of that kind of stuff. So given all that, I like the larger size bet. Unfortunately, as it rolls out, our opponent ends up folding very, very quickly. We end up shipping and not having to show our hand. So there's a little bit of a pro to not having to show it. But at the end of the day, obviously would have much preferred getting called. But always look for these overbet opportunities. There's lots of them. Especially against kind of those younger, more inelastic players that just really, really refuse to get bluffed and are very, very sticky. Look for these situations. Trust me. All right, now let's get on to the next one. All right, this next one, we are on the button. Look down at 6-8 off. Open to 7 by the cutoff. And decide to 3-bet this up to 25. The cutoff was a younger guy, a little bit newer to the table, but had been here for a little while and seemed to kind of be aware of how to play this game, at least to some extent. And I really like 3-betting this for a couple different reasons. One is I'd been a little too tight for my liking, so I wanted to 3-bet and get a little bit more VPIP up in the game. And then number 2 is that I really want to disincentivize someone who's on my direct right or very close to my direct right from taking steal opportunities from me. So sometimes one, maybe 2, 3-bets can get that job done and just kind of show them or disincentivize them in the future from thinking, hey, I'm going to take that steal opportunity, make them think twice, and oftentimes that can get a couple extra steal opportunities back in your pocket. So keep that in mind, and that's definitely factoring into the 3-bet here. So with all of that said, the blinds both get out of the way, cutoff puts in the call, they check, flop comes 5-4 deuce with 2 spades. I fire for 30, and they very quickly fold. And you can make an argument for making this a little bit smaller, maybe something in like the 20 or 25 range. I thought 30 was going to be okay. I thought they were definitely going to feel like they had to continue with all of their ace-x hands for at least one street. And by the way, tons of implied opportunities if the 3 does end up coming through. But ultimately, I think there's going to be a lot of like check call by them and then check fold on a lot of turn cards. So I'm okay with the slightly larger bet because I think that's exactly how this hand is going to run out. He ends up folding. I'm okay with that too. I don't have to play any more of this, but honestly, this is one of the better kind of flops if you're going to have a mess around hand. And of course, 8-6 off isn't a great hand to be 3-betting with by any stretch of the imagination, but sometimes you got to work with what you have in that exact spot, and 8-6 off is exactly what we had in this one. So that said, let's jump on to the next hand. A little while later, we're in the cutoff. Look down at Queen 10 suited. Open to 6, totally fine. Get called by the button, who is someone who looks a little bit newer to poker to say the least. Notice that stack size, and they just kind of seemed a little bit newer, not super comfortable with the game yet. So I end up going heads up with them. Flop comes 9-7, 6, 2 clubs, 1 heart. So have a little bit of a draw, a little bit of a backdoor draw. Just decide to fire it out. Not my favorite texture in the world, but I don't think they're going to make our life hell by any stretch of the imagination, just given how they've been playing. They call the 10. Turn is a jack of hearts. Very, very pretty card. Fire again for 20. Thinking they're going to fold some of their pairs, maybe not all, but they pretty quickly call. And then the river is a queen of diamonds. And decide to go for the thin value bet of 20 one more time. Same bet on the turn and the river here. And I really like this bet when a couple things are true. One, you don't think you're going to get punished for making a smaller size and kind of induce a lot of extra bluff raises. I don't think that's the case against this particular opponent, and largely it doesn't happen a tremendous amount at 1-2 in the first place. And then number 2 is that there's a lot of like one pair hands that are probably in this person's range. When they just decide to call flop and call turn, I think you're probably looking at a lot of like jack X hands, 9X hands, maybe like pair plus draw hands, but ultimately probably not a lot of like 2 pair plus, and as such I really like going for another bet. And I like the smaller bet because the queen puts more pressure on those single pairs, so unless you see a tremendous amount of pure inelasticity from this person, I think the 20 bet should get the job done a good chunk of the time, get us some extra value, or be behind occasionally maybe, but I think this is largely just pure value. So as it ends up running out, again we fire 20, they very quickly call, show my hand, they show aces. Not 100% sure what the heck this person's doing, but hey, nice hand, sir. You won this one. And I guess with that said, a little thin value owning of myself. What are you going to do? All right, let's get on to the next one. A while later, find myself on the button. Send open limp under the gun. Raised to 12 by my young aggressive friend across the way. Down at red kings. 3-bet up to 25. Totally standard on both the size and the 3-bet itself. Quick shove by the big blind for 87 total. And then before under the gun can even fold, middle position already announces that he's all in for 254 total. So this is kind of a situation where I can't see doing anything other than just happily stacking this thing off. If middle position is not the kind of player who is only going to have aces in this situation, and while I'm not particularly enamored with the speed that they decided to jam this in with, I also can't see a fold here either. They could probably have queens just the same, ace king just the same, and honestly this kind of person could have something like tens just the same, based upon the way them playing. So in this situation, I don't see anything to do other than just happily make that call and get it in, show your hand, and hope that you're not against exactly aces. And unfortunately, middle position has exactly aces. I asked the big blind if he's blocking either of us. He refuses to show. Board comes 8-6-4, queen, jack. So even if it was queens or jacks that my opponent happened to have, still not good for me. But unfortunately, I end up having to make the payoff in this situation. And again, can't really see much else to do. It'd be different if this was like an OMC or something like that, but that is not the person we're in against. Don't overthink these spots. Just chalk it up as the cooler that it is, make the payoff, and move on to the next one. Then let's do exactly that. A little while later, and after a bit of rebuilding, look down at ace king suited, under the gun +1. Under the gun opens to 10, and I decide to call, and normally I 3-bet ace king, but this is a situation where I thought it was going to be a little bit better to flat it, simply because the players behind me were getting a little bit antsy, a little bit more aggressive, a little bit more 3-betty and squeezy preflop, so I thought this would be a prime opportunity to induce just that. And for what it's worth, the open raiser is the person who I 3-bet earlier with the 8-6 offsuit, so whatever that's worth, just thought I would put that out there. And just for the record, while I normally do 3-bet with ace king as a default, if I am going to consider flatting it, I do prefer the ace king suited as opposed to ace king off, since the ace king suited will play better in a multi-way pot, which is more likely to be kind of induced in this situation given the fact that it's live and it's so early. I wrote about this in Optimizing Ace King if you're interested in learning about more, but ultimately that's kind of what's factoring in preflop here, even though this is a little bit weird and atypical for me. So end up getting called by 3 more people, so we end up going 5-way to the flop. Flop comes king 10-7 with 1 diamond, 2 hearts. I decide to check here, and at first glance this, again, probably seems a little bit weird, but I think it's worth talking about for at least a moment. So while this is the kind of texture that I definitely don't want to let get checked through, I think the 2 players behind me are very unlikely to let this thing get checked. I think they are very likely to fire at least one of them a good chunk of the time, and probably for a decent size, and because of that, it can probably go I check, one of them bets, 1 or 2 calls, and then I can go forward and play my hand aggressively from there. And your hand looks really bonkers when you take that kind of check raise on the flop approach, and a lot of players will just make a tremendous amount of mistakes against it. And given the SPR, because this is such a multi-way pot, it's kind of one of those where like, we're nearing commitment anyway, so I'm kind of fine with that, versus just firing it ourselves. So again, really make sure you're looking at the exact situation you're in, what players are likely to do behind you, and whether or not you, 1, want to get that flop checked through, and 2, is it likely to get checked through if you check as well. So with all of that said, middle position does fire out for 10, call by the next player, call by the other 2 players, and I decide to check raise this up to 65. Again, kind of going in the aggressive, let's just play this fast mentality. If someone wants to get in with a flush draw or queen jack, okay, totally fine. Could I be against some strong hands? Yeah, but I don't see a tremendous amount of like people not 3-betting with kings and possibly even 10s preflop. I don't think that the original raiser is going to have a tremendous amount of strength when they are in here, so I think I'm going to be shipping this a good chunk of the time, and that's exactly what happens. Rather than go for a check call, which I think would just be absolutely horrific, there's so many turn cards that you don't want to see, and also just draws and stuff that will gladly pay a premium price, and even things like king queen, probably king jack, that I think are totally in there that you can get some value from. So I like this play overall. I know it looks a little bit weird, definitely atypical, especially with given the preflop no 3-bet, but this is definitely the way to think about a situation like this, especially when you're in those multi-way pots and those dynamics can really get kind of awkward quite quickly. Pay attention to which streets you want checked through and which people just simply are not going to allow that to happen. All right, let's get on to the next one. This is the exact next hand. Someone just sat down in seat 1. So I'm going to be under the gun +1 yet again. Look down at King 10 suited. Decide to open to 6. Don't want to limp. Don't really want to fold in this spot, so decide to go for the raise. And after a slew of callers, might be rethinking my $6 open racing size at this particular table going forward. So you call by the hijack, the button, and both of the blinds come along as well. Flop comes 10-6-5 rainbow with 1 club, and the big blind jams it in for 45. So definitely not going to be folding. I don't really see much reason to raise here either, but it's kind of one of those spots that really sucks, because if you call this and anyone behind you raises, you're in kind of a gross situation. So hijack takes a very long time dancing around with his chips and shoves for 259 total, and I pretty quickly let it go once I get the count. And this is just one of those where I'm not getting the worst price in the entire world, but this is just like never ever a bluff. Like on 10-6-5, like I don't even think they're doing this with 7-8. I fail to see anything that I can come up with that I'm ahead of here. Maybe like Jack 10, but even still, like I don't see like a normal like 1-2 player jamming here with Jack 10, Queen 10, 10-9 or anything like that. Like they probably call it and then we go forward from there, like the average 1-2 player, and I had no reason to think this is someone who is just going to be like incredibly crazy or anything like that. So kind of a suck situation after already putting in a call of an overbet on the flop, but I think we just simply have to fold. There aren't a tremendous amount of value combos, but there just simply aren't a tremendous amount of combos I can come up with that I beat either. So hijack ends up tabling pocket 6s, pretty happy with my fold now, 8 and an ace on the run out. Hijack ends up scooping the whole thing. Just kind of a sucky situation, kind of a weird one, but by the same token, I'm happy with my fold, and if you feel differently, leave a comment down below. I'd love to hear it. Otherwise, let's get on to the last one. This last one, we are in the hijack. Look down at Queen 9 off. There's a limp in early position. Decide to attack it to 10. Definitely don't want to just limp this behind, and again, 10 seemed to be doing just fine. Certain tables might need to be a little bit larger, but thought this was going to do okay. Big blind comes along as well as the limper. Both check to us on a 9-6-3 rainbow board. No complaints about top pair. C-bet at 415, right around half pot. Get check raised up to 40 by the big blinds. Quick fold from the other player, and I decide to continue. This is the kind of player who had been doing some check raising and aggressive play throughout this session, and I've played with them I think 1 or 2 other times before, and they do tend to be extremely aggressive when they tend to play, so I'm not thinking this is exclusively sets or anything like that. There are tons of hands that they could be doing with, from draws to overcards to top pair to whatever. So I'm definitely not going to be folding on the flop. We're just kind of play this out and see how it goes, and for what it's worth, when this person aggresses, they tend to follow up with aggression as well. So kind of already put myself in the mindset of I'm likely going to be getting sticky a good chunk of the time unless the board rolls out in some really weird way. And as it turns out, the turn does not really make it all that weird. The turn is actually a 6. Minimizes strong hands even further that they could possibly have. And they fire pretty quickly for 65. Decide to make the call. River is the deuce of spades. They pretty quickly fire for 85. And while I'm not particularly enamored that they only bet 85 as opposed to shoving, right? They left themselves like 20 or 25 back. That does definitely, in my opinion, kind of lean it a little closer to probably a strong hand. Just given the way this board rolled out, I can't see myself finding a fold here by any stretch of the imagination. Can they have some better hands? Sure. Can they have worse hands? Yes, 100%. That's why I snap called. Unfortunately, they end up showing me ace-9. And because that, end up having to brick that thing, pay off And good for them. I mean, honestly, this is not the kind of spot where someone is usually getting this kind of thin value. I'm not sure if he just kind of knows who I am really well or just happened to work into things very nicely, but either way, nice hand, sir. I will definitely make a happy payoff to your ace 9, and hopefully next time I'll be able to get you right back. But for this one, just is what it is, and if you feel differently about this hand again in any way, definitely leave a comment down below. And that is going to wrap up the hands of note for this session. Overall, this was a 5-hour long session, played from 6 to 11 at night. I was negative 370 total on the session for a negative 74 hourly and negative 148 BB per 100 win rate. So obviously not particularly great, but by the same token, when you run kings into aces and whatever the heck this queen 9 hand was right here, it does happen. So I'm really not going to stress about it in the slightest. But if you saw anything in this video and you're like, not 100% sure, please definitely do not hesitate to leave a comment down below. And if you liked the session, liked any hands, or just want to see more vlog content in general, please make sure to give the video a thumbs up. I would massively appreciate that too. And that is going to wrap it for vlog episode number 9. Again, thank you so much for hanging out today. If you need anything at all, please do not hesitate to let me know. And remember, if you want to talk poker, not just in YouTube comments, but with a community that loves poker as much as you do, make sure to visit redchippoker.com/discord to join our free Discord today. Tons and tons of conversation in there, lots of hands being posted, questions being asked, and if you're interested in more poker strategy, that's a great place to start. So until next time, good luck out there, and happy grinding.